here to tell you about another beautiful woman in Venice. This is the former palazzo where lived Luisa Bergalli Gozzi, and she was married to Gasparo Gozzi. That's why she came to live in this palace where his family lived. But much of her life is really about her own accomplishments, her own writings. So let me tell you a little bit about her life. She was living in the 1700s and lived a life of letters. Her father did educate her. She loved reading, writing, studying, things like that. She began mostly by translating and fell in love with the French dramas. So she translated a number of those and even was involved in some of the productions of these at the theaters around town, like the Teatro Sant'Angelo and the Teatro San Moise. But then she moved on beyond translation to write plays of her own. And there's a number of her plays, one where she sort of flips the gender roles. The play is called The Adventures of a Poet, and it focuses on a protagonist, a woman who's actually a hat maker while her husband is the poet. And he as the poet can never make enough money to take care of the family, whereas she as the hat maker is the one who brings in the cash and takes care of the money. And this is interesting because she was really the poet, the writer. Her husband sort of did nothing. He was from nobility, and so nobility often didn't have an actual job. They just tried to rest on their laurels. But we know from her letters, but mostly from her husband Gasparo's brother, who wrote a book of his own memories, Carlo Gozzi tells us that this palace was basically falling apart. The floors were crumbling, the windows had broken panes, and so Luisa really was the only one in the family kind of bringing in any money to help keep the family afloat, this family she had married into, and to try and keep this palace going. So in this play, The Adventures of a Poet, she has this protagonist who's a female hat maker and makes these comments about, you wouldn't be eating if it weren't for me doing my work. So kind of an interesting look at her role in that family. But probably the thing we get to thank her most for is a collection, an anthology of women's poetry that she put together in the 1700s. And it included 250 different authors, women authors, including some of the women that I talk about in my book, A Beautiful Woman in Venice, like Veronica Franco, Modesta Pozzo, Lucrezia Maranella, Arcangelo Terabotti, and then some poems that are actually listed as the author is uncertain, or there's maybe only a first name for the author. But really what this does is give these women a place in literature and preserve their names and their works. This is really the first anthology of women's works like this in Italy. So Luisa Bergalli Gozzi believes strongly in supporting other women in their education, in their writing, and promoting and keeping their works alive. One other thing I'll mention, as a playwright, she was really quite ahead of her time. In the plays that she wrote, she included things like everyday objects, brooms and aprons and things like this. And I read in one source that this preceded Carlo Goldoni by about 2 decades. Well, Goldoni is kind of seen as this innovative, amazing Venetian playwright, and he deserves that for sure. But people often look at him as this innovator, and yet Luisa Bergalli Gozzi did some of the things that he did a couple of decades before he did. So I think there should be some more research into her work to look at her contributions and her place in literature, in Italian literature and playwriting. But this is the house where she toiled away, scribbling every night to keep her family going and to preserve the voices of many Venetian writers.